Welcome, everyone. We appreciate you being here. We've got a lot of people on with us and anticipate quite a few more. Thank you for joining us. Today is Tuesday, February 16th, 2021, and this is the Legislative Policy Committee for the Utah League of Cities and Towns. My name is Dawn Ramsey. I serve as mayor of the city of South Jordan and as chair of the LPC. I appreciate just the chance to be here with all of you, and there's a lot we're going to go over today. So as always, no big surprise, a lot going on. We're going to jump right in. I'm going to turn it to Carson. Carson, would you like to cover the voting software right now front?
Yeah, do we want to do the minutes first since we've just done a voice vote for that?
That's fine. If you'd rather do that first, that's great. I'll put this after. All right. Okay, the first item on our agenda then is that we need to approve and adopt the minutes from our February 8th, 2021 LPC meeting here for the league. Those minutes have been sent out and we will accept the vote for this over the chat. So we have a motion by Kate Bradshaw. We've got Carrie Malkovich. We'll take that as a second. We have another motion by Mayor Slowestrini. Thank you. All right, all in favor of approving the minutes from our February 8th, 2021 LPC meeting, please indicate through the chat. And I will leave it to Roger to let us know when we have reached our threshold.
I think we need about 5 more.
All right. Okay, so if you are a voting member of LPC, we are voting on approving the minutes from our last meeting. Please indicate your vote in the chat.
I think we're there now.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you to all of you. Those minutes are approved. And I didn't write down. All right. Credit for the motion and second goes to Kate Bradshaw and Carrie Malkovich. Keeping track. Okay. All right. You can see on your screen we have just the high level agenda here, and we are now going to turn it over to Carson to discuss the voting because we will not be taking official votes over the chat. Going forward, the voting software is how we need to do it. So Carson, we'll turn it to you and let you give the rundown.
Thank you, Mayor. This hopefully is familiar to everybody by now. I'm dropping the link into the chat. It's the same link we've been using so far, but please go ahead and if you are an LPC voting member, open this in another tab now or on another device. And I'll give everybody a moment to do that. Again, the link is in the chat if you want to just use that. And then we're going to do the quick registration. So please go ahead and once you've had that tab open, just put your name and city on that address. Looks like we've had about 50 voters register. We'll give just another minute for anybody who's still opening it. We had a question restating the directions again. For those of you just joining us, LPC voters, please open the link that was added in the chat box and add your name and your city to that that page. If you're not an LPC voter, please don't do that.
Okay, I think we're ready.
All right.
How many voters do we have, Carson?
We have 63 voters
Okay,
registered.
so that's,
Since it sounded like some folks had technical difficulties last time, I'm going to open up a quick fun poll question or a fun test question. So this isn't, it'll take a moment to load. So this isn't official, but just a run through to make sure that your voting system is working.
And Carson, I feel like pointing out that you're referencing 14 business days. There are 4 weekend days that are still remaining in the session calendar. And I know this because we have a paper chain at our house, and my 3-year-old takes a paper chain off each day. So I know that we still have those 4 weekend days to consider.
Fair point. I'm just pretending that those days don't exist at this point. All right, since this is an official vote, I'm just going to go ahead and close this. So it looks like we've had a fair amount of people being able to use the voting software. So I'll close that now. Thank you for everybody for humoring us.
Great.
11%. We're sad about that. So we'll go ahead and move on.
Okay, we're going to move right into it, and I'll turn it over to Cameron to take it away with land use. We'll start with land use. There's a lot to go over. So
There is. And thank you everybody for joining us for a Tuesday edition. We know Tuesdays are council days for many of you, so we do our best to wrap up on time. Thank you for your time today. Policy Prism, like we start with every meeting, and we try to drill this home with legislators. Continue, next slide, please. I want to take 30 seconds and give you a big picture perspective on what's happening really around the country. This was an article in Governing Magazine last week. You can see the headline, States Preempt Cities Almost to the Point of Irrelevance. This was not about Utah. This referenced several other states. And I can tell you from my conversations with state league directors in other states that we're all fighting similar battles around the country. You've heard me say this before, but it was disheartening to read this column in Governing Magazine. Hopefully you all saw the Robert Gerke column in the Salt Lake Tribune a week or so ago, where he wrote a similar story about the back and forth here in Utah between the state and cities and counties around this issue of preemption. That was a great piece. And we know that several of you have actually taken that column and used it as a conversation starter with legislators, so that they're not just hearing from us about it, but they're also hearing from you about it. And that's going to be vital over these last 3 weeks and frankly in the months to come to help legislators understand that this preemption problem is a real problem, and that we need legislation that doesn't strip you of your authority or erode your ability to provide services and infrastructure to your residents, but actually is more of a partnership that focuses on those outcomes and collaboration. Mayor Silvestrini, thank you. I was on Channel 4 Sunday morning having this very conversation. So we're doing our best to raise the profile of the overall conversation while still working on individual bills, and we urge you to do the same. Next slide, Carson. We are coming into the final stretch. This was a graphic that was on Channel 2 actually last week that we borrowed because it illustrates what's ahead in the last 13 and a half or so business days. We are now in week 5. So you can see in that graph that the number of bills that pass go up exponentially the last 3 weeks of the session, but particularly the final week. The reason for this is the budget will be finished and there will be more committee hearings. And the first half of the session is really budget focused, bills as a secondary focus. And then once the budget is done, it's all bills all the time. So we bring this up to you to make sure everyone's on the same page of how the league process responds to that. We check in with our officers. We have check-ins with our officers on Tuesdays and Thursday mornings in between LPC meetings. And we also have our daily briefing, and we keep you updated through the nightly email. So if there are bills and substitutes and amendments that come up, not everything's going to be signed, sealed, and delivered on Monday at LPC. So it'll be vital for us to have back and forth conversations with you, and the general direction you give at LPC will guide us as we negotiate substitutes and amendments and things as they move quickly over the next 13.5 business days. If you have any questions or any concerns, reach out to Victoria or me or any of us, but buckle up. It's going to be a crazy few days. Carson, next slide. You can track all of our bills on the league website at ulct.org under the advocacy link. To simplify it, we've created this hot link that says click here to see legislative positions, and that just gives you a simple spreadsheet. That spreadsheet is organized by priority level. So between those two functions, you should be able to see everything, both for purposes of ratification in this meeting, as well as things change. So a bill may be read today and top priority and maybe low priority tomorrow because it dies in committee or it gets substituted and the problematic provision is gone. So things are going to move quickly. You can stay in touch with us, keep an eye on the bills here, and stay tuned over the next 2.5 weeks. Carson, next slide. So on that note, let's talk land use. We've had a lot of movement on several key bills that we need to bring back for your consideration. So
Wait.
about SB 61. And Carson, can you, oh, hello there. So Carson, you can move forward, and Victoria, take it away with SB 61.
Thanks, Cam, and thanks, Mayor Ramsey. So SB 61 came out of committee about a week ago, and then Senator Sandel substituted it at the end of last week. We're going to go through the substitute, but I want to give you kind of a bigger context of what's going on in billboards. And I will try my very best to not bore you with the law school definition. So what's happening is that the Supreme Court a few years ago, about 5 years ago, issued an opinion treating on-premise and off-premise signs. So what does that mean? On-premise means a sign advertising something at that location or on the premises where the sign is located. Off-premise sign is advertising something that is not on the premise, not being sold, not not the business location of where the sign is. So billboards are the typical off-premise signs. They're advertising something that is not located on the same property where the billboard is. And Senator Sandel has made it very clear he feels like his bill is addressing an equity issue, that digital billboards and digital on-premise signs should be treated the same. But kind of behind all of this is some recent case law where the Supreme Court looked at the First Amendment as it applied to on-premise signs, because the content of their signs, the speech of their signs, is often regulated differently than off-premise signs because of the content of those off-premise signs, and said that the First Amendment means that you cannot treat them differently. So this is a blurb about this that you can look at if you want to pull up the case that reference came out of the Fifth Circuit, but it's now becoming, there have been several circuits that have opined on this and this free speech issue. Carson, if you go to the next slide. So Senator Sandel has again said that this is an equity issue, that if a city allows on-premise digital signs, that it is unfair to treat those off-premise digital signs differently, that you shouldn't be able to allow on-premise digital signs, but not allow the billboards to become digital. As we worked with him over the bill, he has been really great at reaching out to us and trying to hold discussions with us and industries. And I want to make sure it's very clear that Senator Sandel has tried to, get stakeholders together and talk through the issues. As with a lot of billboard bills, there are always sticking points. So he introduced the second substitute. And what that second substitute does is that it says a municipality may prohibit digital billboards in exclusively residential zones or by scenic byways. So even if you allow on-premise signs for some reason in a exclusively residential zone, you could prohibit digital billboards. The next category is if you allow existing on-premise, so again, like a sign over a business, if you allow those on-premise signs to be digital in a primarily residential zone, and the bill does not define what primarily residential means, but it could be a mixed use zone, but when the city looks at it, it's still primarily residential. You have to allow the billboards to be digital if you're allowing on-premise digital signs, but you can't put a curfew or require dimming on those billboards. The last category is everything else. So any of those other zones where you allow on-premise digital signs, you would have to allow the billboards to upgrade to digital signs. The bill also, unlike the original version of the bill, it also locks zoning ordinances as of January 1st, 2021. So it is retroactive, looking at what your sign ordinances were on January 1st, 2021. We were able to negotiate with industry to expand the curfew. So it used to be 150 feet from a residence in an exclusively residential zone. Now it's 300 feet from a residence in a primarily residential zone. And that the bill also says the municipality may not require forfeiture of another billboard in exchange for converting to a digital. Now, I want to make sure everyone understands what the second substitute does not do. Senator Sandals' argument all along has been that there has to be parity between existing billboards and those on-premise signs. So the bill does not authorize new billboards. It does mandate digital billboards in zones that do not allow digital it does not mandate digital billboards in zones that do not allow digital on-premise signs. So again, to the parity, if your zoning ordinance doesn't allow on-premise digital signs, the bill does not make you take digital billboards in those same zones. And then we were able to negotiate getting rid of some attorney fee language that was in the original bill that was very one-sided to the billboard companies. Carson, if you go to the next slide. So this is to try and illustrate the equity argument as Senator Sandals sees it. On the left, you'll see this very large sign that's at the Traverse Mountain for the outlets. And it is an on-premise sign because it is advertising the shops that are located on the same property where this sign is. And it is a quite large on-premise sign. And Senator Sandals' argument is that you cannot say that this on-premise digital sign is okay, but in the same zone, not allow billboards to also be digital because this on-premise sign is digital. The problem is his bill is not looking at sign difference, size of different signs. So on the right, you will see an illustration of an on-premise digital sign. It's that arrow that's pointing up to that digital sign wrapping around the corner of the building. And then you'll see a billboard. So that on-premise digital sign is quite a bit smaller than the billboard right above it. An argument to Senator Sandal has been, okay, if we are looking at parity, then you cannot forget that there is a parity between sign size. And so just because you have this very large on-premise sign on the left, and that maybe should create a right for digital billboard conversion, that doesn't necessarily mean that one small on-premise digital sign within a city therefore triggers 6 billboards, large billboards, to become digital. And so if you saw our alert over the weekend, this is the argument we're continuing to talk to Senator Sandal about, that if he wants equity, then his bill really does need to reflect equity. Carson, if you go to the next slide. So in our alert that we sent out this weekend, we asked many of you, all of you, to respond to us and let us know how this bill, the substitute, would potentially impact your city. Again, if you don't allow any on-premise digital signs in your city, then you wouldn't be impacted by this. But many cities do allow on-premise digital signs, and it varies zone to zone. 62% ranked SB 61 as a top priority. And we have really spent a lot of time talking to Senator Sandal and the billboard industry about this bill. And so it's good to hear that our efforts are focused in the right direction. Many of you expressed concerns about preemption of local zoning and sign ordinances, and this goes back to freezing ordinances in time because of the retroactive date on the bill. And again, many of you were concerned about small digital signs triggering a digital upgrade of an even larger billboard. And so we, as discussions have gone forward, we've been trying to talk to Senator Sandel and to member stakeholders about this equity issue and seeing if we can find a way to address it. We're also concerned about the zoning preemption and that retroactive date, and that it's really not, we think, Senator Sandel's intention to necessarily freeze a city's sign ordinances in a space and time. We understand his concern that if there's no retroactive date, cities will go in and change all their ordinances before the bill becomes effective. We've assured him we don't necessarily want cities to undermine his bill, but we want an equitable solution that doesn't tie the hands of a city council that never anticipated allowing one small digital on-premise sign to trigger all the billboards going digital.
So Victoria, before you proceed, Mayor Ramsey, there's a comment in the chat, and we want to make sure we're consistent here with what kind of the will of the body here about what we heard back from the survey and from individual conversations. So I'm looking, so I've got Paul Arson. So Victoria, I'll let you address Paul's point.
Okay, so Paul, but the size issue is the point. Why should we not amend our ordinances to address an issue that has now been considered an issue before now? And Paul, that is a really good point, and one we've made to Senator Sandel is no city council ever contemplated when they allowed on-premise digital signs that would then trigger on off-premise digital billboards, because now the legislature, by stepping into the land use realm, they've changed basically the framework and the game rules for setting these ordinances. And so we've talked a lot to Senator Sandel about that. We think he's starting to, understand the concerns about this, but as all of you know, with billboards, it's a tricky thing, and we're still working out the details. But your point, Paul, is well taken. Any other questions? And then Mayor Ramsey, I see a motion from Evelyn, but we want to make sure we answer any other questions before going forward.
Mayor Ramsey, let me add one other quick note. Discussions on this bill have been occurring daily for the last couple of weeks, including over the weekend. And to the credit of Senator Sandel, he's from where he was at the original version to the second sub, demonstrates the fact that he's been listening to all sides and trying to find that common ground. So, we applaud him for that. Paul, your point is a good one, and that's the point we've been discussing with the stakeholders and with Senator Sandel, and stay tuned over the next couple of days.
Okay, we have a motion by Evelyn and a second from Kate Bradshaw to oppose. Let me get back up to exactly where it is. Make a motion to oppose SB 61 second sub unless the language addressing size equity and zoning preemption is included in the bill. So I can take a vote on that one specifically at this point. I'm looking to see if there's any additional discussion. Please go ahead and put it in the chat.
Yeah, so there are a couple of key questions in here. Mayor Burton said that Senator Sandel said he'll be adjusting the sizing. He mentioned that in a chamber meeting, and that's what he said. Senator Sandel has really been a rock star through this process of learning all the different perspectives and trying to craft the bill accordingly. Paul, yeah, the way I'm interpreting Evelyn's motion is that the language in the second sub the league still opposes the language in the second sub, but I'm going back up to read it here, but that we continue opposing it until we address those pieces. We would address those pieces by continued negotiation.
Please vote in the voting system.
Okay, seeing that there's no other questions.
Yep, there's a couple other quick questions. If is this the most helpful stance, and the vote to oppose the second sub? So, Mayor Mann, we've got good dialogue with the industry and with Senator Sandals, so we'll continue to oppose based on these pieces, and if we can get these pieces addressed, then we would revisit our position. So Steve Shields, yes, it would be opposed, but with the understanding that we're continuing to negotiate on these pieces. Will
Okay,
you just
the link
confirm
is
that,
back up.
Evelyn, will you confirm that we're interpreting your motion correctly?
Yes, she said yes. Thank you. Appreciate that. And I should be specific. That's Evelyn Everton from Sandy City. Okay, if you are a voting LPC member and have not registered, the votes are not, if you're a latecomer, just know we're not voting in the chat. We are voting through the voting software. So please register for the voting in the voting software. Carson just reposted the link for that. And we
I think we're there.
reached our threshold. Yeah, I think so.
All right, then I will go ahead and close it. My computer's thinking.
Okay. That motion passes. And so I think hopefully Cameron, Victoria, hopefully that's clear. And we appreciate the efforts of the negotiation that is ongoing. And this just makes it clear that we are staying opposed to the second sub, and negotiations are still in the works, still taking place.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, members. Paul Larson just asked, is SB 144 a red herring to make SB 61 more palatable? Which is a great segue onto this next slide. I don't know, Paul, if it's a red herring the size of a billboard, but we have made it very clear that we are a strong opposed to SB 144, that we really do not see any negotiation wiggle room on SB 144. The underlying premise, and I won't go into this bill bunch because we've put it up before, it has been held in committee, it hasn't moved yet, but we are hoping to get to a spot with SB 61, and then we can, as Cam's put into the comments, hopefully 144 will then go away, but we have no guarantees of that, and we also are not willing to take one bad bill in exchange for another bad bill. We want to keep talking on SB 61 and see where we get, but we are currently still a strong opposed to SB 144. All right, Carson, if you would go on to the next slide. I'll hand it over to Cam to talk about HB 82, the ADU bill.
Perfect, thank you. As we continue the negotiation on the billboards bill, please continue to stay in touch with your senators and reps, not just about billboards, but on all of the bills that we're discussing today and any bills that have impact on local government. They are receiving thousands of emails because of the limited in-person access. So make sure you're texting and calling and communicating with them as much as possible so that they know how bills will impact your community. As we continue negotiating on 61, we will stay in touch with the officers, and you stay in touch with us as the conversation goes on. House Bill 82, this is the one on accessory dwelling units that is currently awaiting a floor vote because it's awaiting the substitute. We expect to see a sub in the next couple of days. So these were the negotiators that you authorized what seems like forever ago, but it was only 2 weeks ago. And I appreciate all of their time in 7 a.m. meetings as we've walked through different concepts. Next slide. This is last week's slide, okay? Last week's slide. So this is what we proposed, said this was the counter proposal that our internal group made, and then the initial response back from Representative Ward and House leaders. We were going back and forth, and then the bill was in House Business and Labor a week ago, Monday afternoon, or I guess 8 days ago now on Monday afternoon. Okay, so next slide. So the LPC took a position of neutral on the counter proposal and said, okay, staff negotiate with Representative Ward and with others to help get House Bill 82 within the framework of the league counter proposal. During the committee hearing last Monday, Representative Mike Schultz, who's a member of House leadership, called the league out specifically. I know many of you were listening to that committee because I got a bunch of texts from you while I was sitting there being berated about this bill. But Representative Schultz acknowledged he has passion about the issue and wanted the league to, take compromising on this bill seriously. The next day, Bountiful City Council hosted Representative Ray Ward, who's their hometown legislator, for a 45-minute back and forth conversation, which I think was incredibly helpful at helping Representative Ward understand the perspective from a city perspective about state overreach in general and some of the concerns around the previous versions of House Bill 82. This is another bill where there have been basically daily negotiations. And then I linked last time to this column from the Deseret News, but there's been a lot of media attention around this bill as well. So here's where we're at with a potential fourth sub. So this is the framework that's being deliberated on, and we've got another negotiation this afternoon. We're looking at, rather than a full preemption, which is what was originally contemplated in House Bill 82, what we're referring to as a partial preemption and more of a state direction where cities must allow internal ADUs in a certain percentage of the city. And keep in mind, that's what we had offered as part of the counter proposal. And then there'd be a lower percentage in college towns. We're still finalizing exactly what that could look like. But the key takeaway is that the city, through your zoning authority, would still have some flexibility about where internal ADUs make sense and where they don't. So it would be the majority of your city where they would have to be allowed, and in the area zoned residential. Okay, so not number of residential zones, but the area zoned residential. But you still would have some flexibility if you had certain areas that, due to infrastructure or other reasons, internal ADUs didn't make sense. You'd still have some flexibility to not allow them under your zoning. We have gone back and forth over a variety of standards. What's listed there in number 1 is what is in the third sub. We're still negotiating over a few of those pieces. Then on the enforcement options, the third sub doesn't have either one of these, but we're still negotiating over both of them to potentially have some sort of lien authority, and then also the ability to enforce against short-term rentals. Because our point that we've made repeatedly is that we don't want to open up internal ADUs only to have them all turn into vacation rentals and thus exacerbate the housing crisis. Councilmember Ellsworth referenced in the chat box about concern from the banking community about a lien. That's what our meeting is about this afternoon, is we're meeting with the Bankers Association and a few others to see if we can thread the needle. I feel like that's been the story of the session. I've used that term way too often, but see if we can find some common ground with the Bankers Association over the lien piece in order to ensure enforcement. So again, we don't have a bill for you, but you'll see as you look at the potential fourth sub framework that it does look very consistent with the framework that you voted neutral on last week and urged staff to negotiate toward that framework. So we have made some really good progress, and frankly, kudos to Representative Ward and to House leadership for acknowledging the concerns we were raising and trying to find middle ground. And I do think the Bountiful City Council deserves a ton of credit for the meeting they had with Representative Ward last week and helping move the ball forward here. Paul, you asked the question, it popped up on my screen here. Yes, so that's been one of the major items for us, is ensuring that a business license that a city may require that, because that also helps on the enforcement side. So that's one of the pieces that Representative Ward had put into his third sub, and we're still continuing to build off it for the potential fourth sub. At this point, we still don't have a new bill for you. We're still operating off of your neutral position on the proposal from last week, but we think what we're showing you here is consistent with your neutral position from last week. So that's what we've been operating under. Okay, let's see. Comment from Valerie Clayson about the percentage of house and number of rooms completely negates any kind of standards for a true ADU. The cities will see duplexes and single family zoning. Yeah, so this has been a key back and forth is it, if it does turn into a duplex where an owner is not still living in the home, what sort of enforcement mechanism does the city have to mitigate that? Yeah, Councilmember Ellsworth said, yep, this will be enforcement trouble. And Mayor Mann says the owner occupied mitigates that. And you know, this is part of the back and forth is how to find that balance. So I think, so I'm glad you brought it up. We'll bring it up in our enforcement negotiation later this afternoon. Councilmember Ellsworth pointed out it's really hard to enforce on owner occupancy and knowing who lives there and charge them. That's why we were looking at the property tax lien in the first place, is because that attaches to the ownership of the property in a financial way. And so, you know, there could be some bite to that. But again, we've got another negotiation this afternoon on it. I'm looking to see if there are any other comments. Oh yes, parking. So Gary Watcott from South Jordan asked about the parking. So we have negotiated that a city may require an additional parking spot for an internal ADU. So let's say I have a basement in my home that I want to rent out, but I have no on-site parking accommodation. The city could say no to my application based on that, because the city can require that you have to have one more parking spot. You can't require more than one, but you could require one. This is also why we've been negotiating over the minimum lot size, because the minimum lot size overlaps and dovetails with parking challenges, amongst other things. Okay, so Bill asks, how is College Town designated defined? Should include all communities within a certain distance from transit options and campuses because people drive to campus. Yeah, at this point, the focus on College Towns really has been around those communities that are home to the flagship and the main campus of the institution. So recognize that communities that border college towns have some impact, but it's not to the same degree that the college towns have and the difficulties those college towns have around enforcement. I'm waiting to see, Mayor Ramsey, if any other questions pop up.
As am I, thank you. And just a reminder, if you have a comment that you'd like everybody to be able to read, please include the panelists and attendees. Click on that when you type your chat. If you want it just to go to the panelists, it will go to those of us you can see on the screen. Otherwise, if you want everyone to read it, include all attendees.
Okay, so Mayor Bierman asks, what enforcement tools will be available to prevent short-term rentals? And this has been part of the tug of war. Is House leadership and Representative Ward have both acknowledged to us on multiple occasions our concern that state mandated internal ADUs will turn into vacation rentals because of market forces. And they said, that's not our intent. So let's figure out a way to try to prevent that from happening. So what we have been discussing has been allowing cities to use short-term rental websites for purposes of regulating the internal ADUs. So in other words, using the example I gave before of if I wanted to rent out my basement and I was advertising it as a short-term rental, the city could take an enforcement action and say, this is not supposed to be for a vacation rental. This is to address long-term renters. And so the city the city could crack down on that if it's an internal ADU. So there would be a distinction within the code between internal ADUs and other types of vacation rentals. Mayor Bierman, I should also point out that we, as part of this tug of war, have raised the concern that the short-term rental bill from 5 years ago that made it basically impossible for cities to utilize short-term rental websites for purposes of compliance. We've argued that language has actually exacerbated the housing crisis around the state because of the market forces around vacation rentals. So I think this issue will facilitate a conversation during the interim to demonstrate with data what the impact of that bill has been over the last few years. So stay tuned on that one. Matt Packard said if the owner's in a home, it solves many of the issues. And Matt, that is the number one point that we have heard from Representative Ward, from House leadership, from Senate leadership, from the governor, and others, has been if we as state leaders can help you ensure that the owner is there, then a lot of the concerns that cities have should be at least open to be addressed. Now, Councilmember Ellsworth and others would say not necessarily because of our experience in college towns and elsewhere, but that's been one of the key sticking points. The other key sticking point is, and let's just be honest about this one, is whenever I talk to legislators about this bill, inevitably they say, I know of plenty of illegal basement apartments in my neighborhood, and the cities aren't freaking out about those, so why are you freaking out about this bill? And so we counter that with the fact, facts around local authority and how code enforcement works and how we respond to complaints and all that jazz. But I just wanted to give you a sense of the arguments that we're hearing back from folks. And Paul Larson just made a comment that's an argument for abolishing speed limits. And be careful what you wish for, because there are some legislators, I think, who would abolish speed limits if they had their way. But that is, that's the back and forth. And Councilmember Ellsworth just said people in Provo care very little until the parking gets scarce. Folks start parking on the lawn, et cetera. Yep, that's the tug of war between whether you prevent a problem or try to solve the problem after you already have it on your doorstep, pun intended. Are there any other questions about where we're at with ADUs? Let's see, Ryan Carter. Oh, here they come. Okay, so Ryan Carter, don't forget the legislature is required cities cannot define a single family residential zone to allow fewer than 4 people who are unrelated by blood or marriage to live together. Yeah, this bill also is contemplating striking out the term unrelated. Mayor Mann, illegal ADUs is why this bill may not result in a significant increase in ADUs. Yeah, Mayor Mann, this will be a fascinating data point to track, is to see how many more ADUs come online because of this proposal. Mayor Burton, we've been concerned about ADUs for a long time, and enforcement tools will be helpful. So that's why you can see, Mayor Burton, our approach in the counter proposal, and kudos again to the members of our ADU team, is to address zoning, standards, and enforcement. Bill asked, is this likely to pass? Honestly, this bill would have passed by now, but for our opposition, and our opposition has created the space to try to negotiate a better product. And so kudos to Representative Ward for putting the brakes on the bill so that we can get to a good position. The league officers, Victoria and I, meet with the governor's senior staff every week. And in every call, they've made it very clear that this is a top priority and that the governor is supportive of it. This bill is Speaker Wilson's #1 priority bill. He's not the bill sponsor, but of all the bills that are out there, this is the #1 priority for him. And Senate leadership has expressed general support for the bill as well. So Bill, yes, a bill will pass. And so we're trying to thread the needle. There's that term again. Ken from North Salt Lake says the league has done a great job trying to show that we're pro-affordable housing while trying to preserve some municipal authority. So thanks to their work too. And thanks to Bountiful for their work too. Amen. Bountiful has been phenomenal. And I think Ken has raised a very good point that we'll need to address as an organization after the session, which is helping legislators understand what cities can do versus what cities can't do to address housing affordability and affordable housing. We certainly have brought it up many, many times, and it's going to need to be a concerted effort in the months to come. Bountiful, a city on a hill. Somewhere Gary Hill is laughing right now. Okay, with that, Mayor Ramsey, again, we don't need a motion yet because there's not yet a bill, but so everyone is clear, if a fourth sub comes out that's consistent with the third sub and things are moving and we can't wait till next Monday, we'll confer with the officers to make sure we're comfortable. And you have set a neutral position on the concept last week that we've been negotiating toward, and we'll rely on that with the feedback from the officers if a fourth sub comes out before Monday.
I think that's good. I don't think we have anything here to necessarily take a different kind of vote on, take a different position on. I think proceed exactly as you just spelled out. And thank you. So much work has gone into this, and I appreciate that some of it has been given a shout out in the chat. So much work, and inordinate amount of work. And I add my appreciation to those that have been expressed to the Bountiful City Council for the time that you spent with Representative Ward as well. But thank you to everyone working on this.
Okay, speaking of housing, Mayor Ramsey, here's a quick update on SB 164. Last week, we shared this slide with you, and while we were meeting, the Commission on Housing Affordability was meeting. Since that time, they've been taking feedback, and I'm expecting any day this week to have another commission meeting. So thank you to Salt Lake Council Member Andrew Johnston, Lehigh Council Member Chris Condi, and Midvale Assistant City Manager Matt Dahl, who have been the three voices for local government on the commission. I expect the sub to look different from the version that we saw last week. So again, stay tuned. I expect a sub any day in a new commission meeting. And so again, we're continuing with the position from last week, but just wanted to let you know that this bill's still out there and will likely change quite a bit over the next few days. So you can move on to the next one, Carson.
All right, thanks, Cam. We're going to move on to HB 98. These housing bills have been with us from the beginning of the session, and I'm hopeful that by the end of this week we'll have some resolution, but they've been difficult, tough bills. As you all remember, HB 98 in its current form prohibits or basically allows a builder to do their own plan reviews and building inspections, and also stops a municipality from putting in a lot of design element requirements. I'm going to hand it over to Gary, who's spent way more time than I can possibly recognize working on this bill, including stakeholders, working with the Home Builders Association, to talk about what he expects to come in a substitute that's not out now, but will come out this week. Gary, if you're there.
Yes, thank you. I'm just wondering how I get all these hours back. If there's a law we can pass or something of that nature that gives us all of these hours that we've been spending on these bills back. But anyway, this bill is, we've negotiated and negotiated. We've been taking input from all the different parties. We've got the special districts that have given input. We've got cities that have been concerned. And originally the bill was just a total preemption bill is what it was. It was just indicating that, you know what, if you don't meet your deadlines, the 14 and the 21 days, it doesn't matter what kind of structure it is, whether it's commercial or residential, multifamily or single family, the builder gets to, you don't even need to meet those time periods. The builder from the very beginning gets the opportunity to do both plan review and also inspections. There's just no say on the part of the city. And if you can imagine what that might do to our funding our departments and all kinds of things. And particularly, it would take out that third-party review, that second set of eyes that take a look at projects on behalf of the end users. The end users are not represented most of the time, and so it would have done that. as we began to talk to the Home Builders Association, I've been talking to them for a full year. Every once in a while, we do get anecdotes that are, I have to shake my head sometimes with some of the things that some of us do, and I include ourselves in that as Layton City. And so there are some jurisdictions that take an awfully long time to process these applications, notwithstanding the fact that a couple of years ago, we changed the provisions of state law to provide for specific time periods for these approvals. And I think it was even longer that we changed the time periods for the inspection approvals. And we gave a consequence back then for not performing those inspections within those time periods. So what we've done in negotiating with the Home Builders Association is to take us back to where we were. Take us back to that 14-day period of time that we were given a couple of years ago to perform the plan review. Take us back to those 3 days that we were given several years ago to do plan review. And if you remember, the consequence of not performing the 14-day plan review was that they would automatically be able to proceed based on the engineer's stamp or the architect's stamp on the plans. And then the inspections, the 3-day inspections, we were expected as cities, if we weren't able to do it in 3 days, to hire an inspector, qualified inspector, to perform those inspections. Well, that didn't work very well. And so what we've managed so far to sit down and negotiate is that, you know what, if we can't do it within the 14-day period of time, and we've checked with our inspectors, and most of our inspectors are doing it under 10 days, and we realize that there are return, back and forths, I don't think we're going to have problems if we complete it within a particular, a reasonable time period. I think the problems occur when we exceed what is a reasonable time period for getting these plan reviews completed. But the way that the substitute will probably read is that if we fail to get our inspection done within the 14 days, then the architect's stamp or the engineer's stamp provides the approval for that plan, and they can proceed forward with the construction. Then you go to the inspection. If the inspection isn't completed within 3 days, then they are able to hire an inspector, qualified inspector through the Doppel approved inspector to complete the inspection and to issue a certificate of occupancy. Like I say, I've talked to our inspectors, and they essentially believe that they can meet these periods or these deadlines. So that's one part of the bill. The other part was the plan review or the design standards.
Gary,
yes.
Before you go to design standards, there's been a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah.
Paul Larson asked, if the plan does not meet code, does the clock stop?
If the plan does not meet code, does the clock stop? Well, if the plan doesn't meet code, the building inspector would catch that, and there is no, it does not stop the clock. It has to meet code. They can't violate the code. There's no provision that allows them to violate the code. So I guess essentially that, yes, the clock would stop if the plan is not in compliance with state code.
And then Craig Smith had a few points that maybe should be considered. Clarify that the inspector is not hired by the builder, it's not under governmental immunity, that the private building inspector be required to have a high level of liability insurance. And his third point is if there's no reduction in fees paid to the city or county if a private inspector is hired.
Okay. So starting with the last one, one of the things we want to make sure of is that there is no reduction in fees as a result of their hiring their own. So the answer to that is yes, there will not be a reduction in fees for their hiring their own. As far as the others go, we will make it clear that essentially when the developer hires their own, well, an engineer is insured anyway. There's errors and emissions insurance for their engineer. And if the city is not employing that engineer, they are not covered by our immunity. And if the city is not employing the building inspector, they're not covered by our immunity. I don't even know that you need to say that, but we will make it clear that if they do determine to hire their own inspector at the end of 3 days, then the inspector will need to be properly insured, and that they will not come under they don't come under our immunity anyway, but we can make that clear.
Okay, and then Paul had further concern about issuing a permit on a plan that doesn't meet code, and there was a comment back that the building inspectors would enforce red lines in the fields. One last comment, then go on to design elements. Nathan Bracken asked if whether the banking, insurance, and general contractor communities had reviewed this particular substitute or commented on it.
Well, there's no substitute out yet, and so the answer is no. And there may be pushback from those communities. I don't know. If they push back, they push back. We're not carrying the water for those institutions. What we're doing is just working on what works for us as cities. As far as here's my opinion on Paul's question, and that is that if somebody, if the 14-day, the plan review were not completed within the 14 days and it went to inspection, I don't know very many cities that would allow the inspection to be done by their own inspectors if the plan was reviewed by the developer's engineer and approved by the developer's engineer. I would think that the actual inspections would probably be completed by the developer's inspectors as well, because I don't know that any of us would want to take that responsibility. But nonetheless, if they wanted to out in the field, they could, our inspectors could actually complete those inspections. That's actually the way it reads now, is that at the end of 3 days, we have to hire an inspector. I realize they're our inspector, but at the same time, it is an independent inspector that would be looking at the building and issuing the final order, certificate of occupancy for that. In the interest of time, let's move on to the design standards. Were there any other questions?
There's been some further chats about this concern over the clock stopping and starting, and I will share those with you afterwards so you can see.
Okay. Yeah, here's the problem. Every time we recommended that we stop the clock over something, it's something that they have a major issue with, simply because a practice out there has been for jurisdictions to stop the clock for relatively small things. Major things, they're going to stop the clock anyway, because you can't proceed forward if you got a dangerous condition in the construction. But minor things that should have been placed on a sticky note on the plat, which the current code provides for, just a small red line on the plat. Unfortunately, many jurisdictions, and I know this for a fact, many jurisdictions have used that to essentially stop the clock. That's what they are trying to prevent, and that's what they're trying to approach with this. Okay, design standards. When they began, there were a multitude of design standards that are in the bill. You can go back and read it and see that there's just a ton of things that they wanted to exclude from our ability to be able to impose design standards. This actually comes from a bill, a Texas piece of Texas legislation that actually prohibits any type of design standards from being imposed by a municipality in the interest of quote unquote affordable housing, trying to create affordable housing. We went back, we talked to them, and there are some things that we both agreed that cities probably ought not to be involved in, and those were easy ones to deal with. The other ones came with a great amount of difficulty. But we actually came up with a list that we thought was acceptable, and then exceptions, and the exceptions or exemptions from the design requirements, I think are as important as the design requirements that they have excluded. And just to give you an idea, most of them are interior design requirements. Some of them are exterior. They're the dimensions of a structure, not including the garage. The special districts were concerned about water conservation and any type of regulation on landscaping. So we took landscaping out almost entirely, except for the backyard. That's the only thing we can't regulate is backyard landscaping. And then we put an exception in for that, saying that yes, we can, if it has to do with water conservation. So, and then on fencing, they wanted to exclude all fencing requirements in subdivisions and around homes. And we limited that to just front yard fencing. They wanted to limit the size of garages. We exempted garages from the total square footage requirements that that we could no longer regulate. And then now here's the important part. The important part is what the exemptions specifically from the requirements. And the exemptions are, let me see if I'm looking at the right slide.
Carson, if you'd go to the next slide.
Oh, yeah, go to the next slide. There you go. The exemptions are for FEMA requirements, national flood insurance requirements, historic buildings, local, state, and federal, wildland or urban interface requirements, development agreement requirements, PRUDs, and other types of overlay zones. In other words, where the developer or where the contractor is getting something for a density or narrower streets, whatever PRUDs provide for, in exchange for the design requirements. And then also we wanted to make sure that pre-1940, in other words, older neighborhoods were also excluded because of the Ogden and Salt Lake situations where they do have a lot of older neighborhoods where they require special design requirements for those neighborhoods. So anyway,
Gary, can I jump in here real quick?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you to you and to the rest of our negotiating team on this bill. There have been a handful of questions that are specific about language that we will collect and respond to. And then there are several questions about whether council should issue formal letters of opposition to the bill. It's always tricky to deliberate about a bill that's not yet public, but we hope it'll be public in the next couple of days. And so, from our perspective, the LPC takes positions on bills once bills are out. And so you'll see listed on the slide, neutral if consistent with the framework, but we're waiting until the bill comes out and everybody has a chance to actually look at it and review it, et cetera. And then we'll come back to you if it's consistent with the negotiations to request a neutral position. Those of you who are considering letters of opposition, I would recommend waiting until a new bill comes out, because I can just speak from experience, having spoken with many legislators about this bill. Whenever we try to talk to them, their response is, "Oh, I hear it's going to be sub, so I don't want to talk about it right now." So you don't want to, I think, wait for the sub, review the sub, figure out what it means for your communities. We'll be reviewing it to make sure it's consistent with what we've been negotiating. And then I think we identify the next steps from that point forward.
And just so you know, this is still a little bit of a work in progress, even as we begin to work on the second sub. It's in right now with drafting. And so we should have a second sub to look at in a short period of time. But if you take a look at the principles that we've put up in the slides that Victoria has put together, And I think you'll see that if you compare that to the original bill, you'll see that we've come a long way when it comes to negotiating down, especially those design standards. And then if you take a look at the exemptions, I think you'll find that that we've come a long way from where it was. So
Keep putting questions in the chat and we'll follow up with people. And then as soon as the bill is ready for public, because I still haven't seen it. I mean, there are lots of drafts going back and forth. So as soon as it's public, we'll distribute it so that you can review it and get back to us.
that will be good. Thank you.
Any other questions for Gary or for the other members of the team that have been negotiating on this bill? So Mayor Ramsey and Roger, just to point out, like, the intent would be a neutral position, but we're not taking that position today because there is no bill. So it's, we're putting that out there for people's consideration, but we'll see what happens when the bill comes out. Okay. Carson, you can advance. Okay, this is a bill that we're actually quite excited about, that will likely get added to SB 113. So again, not taking a position, but letting you know that I expect, hopefully by tomorrow, that we'll have language that'll be added to 113 to try to maximize the local land use planning around Front Runner. It would create what is known as a housing and transit reinvestment zone. So if you remember a few months ago at LPC, we talked about spaghetti against the wall. Everyone was trying to come up with different concepts to try to improve both the planning around transportation, but also incorporate housing into the planning around transit in particular. Those conversations over the last few months have coalesced around this potential new tool known as a housing and transit reinvestment zone. So you can see we've listed in the bullet points what that could look like. At this point, it would only be around Front Runner and a certain radius from a Front Runner station, with these different components that if all the local entities participate, then the state would prioritize infrastructure investment. So one of the questions that's popped up in the box is about the role of school districts. We have had high-level preliminary conversations with the school districts about what this tool could look like. So again, once the language comes out, we expect a lot more dialogue about what participation means from all the different entities. Again, this would be limited to just Front Runner stations. So stay tuned. This will likely be added to SB 113 in the next day or so. Okay. Yeah, Mayor Silvestrini said it's an exciting prospect, but it'll likely only be a couple of these to start out with. Yep, and that was the intent of tying it to Front Runner, is to say this type of tool could be very valuable, but to quote the great philosopher Mike Caldwell, let's measure twice, cut once. And so using Front Runner as the hook, get all the details right about having all parties, all hands on deck, from school districts to the state to the local governments, and then figure out what that looks like around those transit stops. Okay, public safety. Let's give you an update on where we're at there. And John Park, I'll let you give quick updates on those last two. The Loveless and Lee Task Force met last week. These were all of the different positions that they took that we have since shared with both bill sponsors and with committee members. In fact, several of these were in committee with our amendments last week and have moved on. For purposes of time today, I won't go into detail about them unless there are any questions. We've referenced several of them in the nightly email as well. John, can you do a quick update on SB 155 and SB 196?
Be happy to. First of all, Senate Bill 155 is Senator Thatcher's bill. We've been working and meeting with him periodically over last forever, and talking about the 988 program. We talked about it a little bit last week. As of January 1st, if you dial 988, it's a suicide hotline. It's going to go somewhere. He had a bill that was very intent on spending a lot of money. And it was probably the biggest thing for us was it was not taking into consideration the interoperability between our 911 services and our PSAPs with what he was trying to accomplish. He's changed that bill, and now he's just creating an advisory board, a big advisory board, but he's committing creating an advisory board to help with all things that we want to happen, and giving him a list of things to do that is really kind of addressing everything we need him to do to get ready for it. And we'll talk about, how they interact with the 911 service and those type of things. So we think it's a good bill. LELC, I just got off LELC just as this meeting started, and they support that bill. On Senate Bill 196, Senator Iwamoto, who is a great help to us. If you remember, we did SB 13. We supported that a while ago. That talked about making sure that if we have a police officer that's being investigated, essentially that if we're trying to hire that police officer, we can find that out, that he's being investigated. And we talked about a companion bill to that, and Senate Bill 196 is the companion bill to that, that just says that we have the ability to talk between post and agency to agency in the police side to be able to talk about a certain list of things that's in the bill to make sure that the candidate we're getting or where we want to interview or to hire, that we can talk to each other without getting sued, that we have immunity about that. And so we've been waiting for that to come out, and we want to ask you to support both those. Questions?
Thank you, John. One thing I'll point out, when you look at this list of bills, these are all within the scope of our task force, which is enhancing community trust in police. We've been criticized through the session of opposing every bill that's out there in this space, but you can see that because of discussions with legislators, we've been able to get to a point where these bills are both good for community stakeholders as well as good for police. The Chiefs of Police Association and LELC and the League are able to support them, and they have support of community stakeholders. So 2/3, maybe 3/4 of the bills on the screen here are bills that our task force endorsed. So we think that also is a positive sign. Any questions on the public safety bills? Mr. Hiskey, HB 367, qualified immunity. We've been waiting for this bill all session. It came up multiple times during the off season. I think John Park was ready to retire when the bill came out because he said this bill is an awful bill. We've got a negotiation tomorrow morning on it. And so at this point, stay tuned. In our bill tracker, we've listed opposed, so you'll be ratifying an opposed position today because of the potential changes to government immunity. But we'll have a better sense tomorrow what the bill sponsor is hoping to accomplish with that bill.
Essentially, what that does is it gets rid of governmental immunity for police officers, in case you're not up to date on that.
Perfect. Okay. Next slide. We are almost done.
Sorry, my computer is still loading.
So Carson, while it's loading, I can go ahead and just, the next slide should be HB 342, Government Enterprise Amendments. This is Representative Strong's bill. We've seen this in various iterations in other legislative sessions, but this basically has two components. First, it requires you every 2 years to kind of catalog what they see as competitive activities in your community. So identify them, potentially look at how you could privatize those activities, and then hold a public hearing to talk about why you are doing those as a municipality. The second component would be that if you are contemplating a new competitive activity that has a percentage of impact on your budget, that you'd have to do a study and also basically inform citizens that you're going to be making that type of expenditure. We're recommending an opposed position because of the time and financial impact in trying to do these studies, and we'll also work with the sponsor to let him know of our concerns.
Wayne, one thing I'll bring up, we put it in the context here, it's arisen multiple sessions, is we basically fight this bill every year. So this year will be no different. Okay, my turn. House Bill 347, Homeless Services Amendments. Representative Ellison is running this bill. One of our LPCs prior to the session, we quickly talked about the Gardner Policy Institute's recommendations around restructuring how the state of Utah addresses homelessness and the partnerships with local governments, local homelessness coordinating committees, and the private sector. The Gardner Institute this year had a work group that was set up by Bill Representative Ellison ran last year. That work group included Mayor Mendenhall, Mayor Caldwell, now former Mayor Pike, and yours truly, and had multiple meetings over the summer that resulted in the report that they presented. The bill is an effort to codify that report. The reason you already see SUP coming is because when I met with Representative Ellison on Friday, those are the first words out of his mouth. And when we met with the governor's team again this morning, they also said SUP's coming because we're trying to make sure it mirrors what the Gardner Institute is recommending and has the support of the philanthropic community, local homelessness coordinating committees, local government, et cetera. So a couple of major takeaways is that for the first time, you'd have this Office of Homeless Services. And last year, the term was a homeless czar. This year, the term is a deputy director within DWS. What it'll actually be in the sub is still to be determined, but there would be a point person reporting to the governor to coordinate a homelessness response in the state of Utah. Then you would have a homelessness council that would replace the state coordinating committee on homelessness, and the 5 mayors who are on the current state homelessness coordinating council would continue to serve on the homelessness council, okay? And there's also in 347, no contemplation to changing the public safety mitigation fund, which those of you who were around 4 years ago recall, that's the fund that the legislature created where a portion of local government sales tax goes to the state, and then the State Homelessness Coordinating Committee provides reimbursements to the cities that house shelters based on the public safety impact in their communities. So as of now, there's no change contemplated to the fund other than you'll now have the Homelessness Council as opposed to the State Homelessness Coordinating Committee, but you'd still have those local voices on there. One thing that's important for people to know is that the Public Safety Mitigation Fund has about $5 million in it, which is a fraction of the overall cost of providing public safety for those 5 cities that house shelters. None of that money goes to any operations. You know, it's very defined in statute that the money only goes to offset and reimburse public safety costs. So I anticipate once the bill is passed, the new structure is implemented, and the governor hires his new deputy director, that the deputy director will want to speak to the league and get a better understanding about the fund and about the role that local governments play within your local homelessness coordinating committees around addressing homelessness. So plan on that conversation during the off season. We're keeping an eye on the bill. Our recommendation at this point is general support as long as it's consistent with the Gardner recommendations. But at this point, we've just listed amend because we know a substitute is coming. So wanted to make sure that was on your radar. Let's see, any questions about this one?
So just really quickly, we've got a couple more bills that just want to highlight some of the good things that we're supportive of in the legislative session. So HB 348, they are renaming the Governor's Office of Economic Development to be the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity. So majority of that bill is just kind of going through all the code and renaming, but there is a new commission. There'll be a 14-member commission, which the governor will chair. And this commission is tasked with coming up with a statewide economic strategy for the state, and also focus our efforts, the state's efforts in economic development. And so instead of just attracting companies to come to Utah that will compete with existing companies, kind of look at how do you diversify the economy and attract those that will add to the diversification and not necessarily compete with those that are already here. We, the league, get to support appoint one individual to the commission that will represent urban areas, and then UAC will appoint one individual that will represent kind of the rural areas of the state. So there will be 2 local government folks on the commission of 14. So we're recommending a support position for this bill. Next slide. There are 2 other bills that we think are worthy of the league support. There's HB 354. So this creates a a bank for cities, towns, and counties in 4th through 6th class counties to come and get low interest loans to help build infrastructure within their communities. And so kind of lists kind of what those options could be, but we're recommending support for this legislation. Also, SB 194, the Utah Main Street Program. This would create a commission within GOED, or the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, in which they would come up with best practices, potentially have funding sources on how to revitalize your main streets in your various communities. So we're also supportive of that. Next slide.
So Mayor Ramsey, we'll turn it back to you to see if there are any other bills that people want to bring up from the group. The one thing I'll add about SB 194, Paul Larson said it could benefit cities of every size. And the LPC back in December voted to express general support for the concept, and we've just been waiting for the bill. So I wanted to make sure that point was clear. Ken Leatham has asked about updates on House Bill 75 and House Bill 174, which are the municipal pilot programs around voting. House Bill 174, I believe, is still in rules and hasn't budged since we last chatted. House Bill 75 was in committee, and I'm just quickly double checking my notes here. Yeah, so House Bill 75 has now passed the House and is over to the Senate, but it is being substituted to try to address the point that we raised last week about the relationship between cities and counties. I have not, I need to follow up with Representative Stenquist to see where he's at on that piece. But it has now passed the House, and Senator Bramble is taking it from here in the Senate.
Thank you. All right. Any other bills that you'd like to discuss, let us know in the chat. Anything else you'd like to bring up before we move on to our ratification of staff recommendations? Okay, Sean Guzman of St. George had to drop off. Did we discuss first sub 155?
Yes, we did, Sean. Our recommendation as staff was to approve that, to support it.
Okay, thank you. Who's I can't see who's asking this, sorry.
Oh, Mayor Ramsey, can I?
Clint Smith is asking about HB 303. Any pushback from cities that you're aware of?
There was one city that had concerns, but I think they were able to get it addressed in an amendment. And other than that, I have not heard other concerns on the EMS bill.
Okay. Councilman Smith, if you've got specific things on that to share, any information, feel free to put it in the chat, please. Mark, HB 364, Utah Lake Authority for future discussions.
Yep, I can take that one. So for those of you who are not in Utah County, if you recall, 2 LPCs ago, we told you that we were anticipating a bill that could either go one of two ways. It could either be an inland port type bill that would create a new political subdivision to govern Utah Lake and surrounding land, or it could be more of, for lack of a better term, a glorified interlocal agreement between the communities and the state around governing Utah Lake. We've been waiting for the language, which has just come out since we did the agenda. And so, Carson, is it possible to elevate Mark Christensen so that he can just speak about it? I've got all the flurry of emails, but rather than me trying to go through it, Mark, can we just put you on the spot to take a moment to update the group of where things are at right now? And
Mark, you should be able to speak now.
I know you've not wanted to do that in a long time, so thank you, Carson and Cam. No, just a quick update on it. The bill is out now. Again, we just want to keep it on the radar. This is, you know, it's a hack, if you would, or kind of a rewrite of the inland port bill. And basically the intent is to give the Utah Lake Authority inland port type authorities and powers. Met with Representative Brammer, and he's been very good to work with us on trying to soften the language and allow us to make some proposals. So we're going to try and get those proposals into his hands soon, which would take it so it's less stick and more carrot, and more of an option for us to try and participate with the Lake Authority. We are trying to put language in that does not, that clearly emphasizes that they don't have control over the adjoining political subdivisions, and it is, we hope, something that we can live with if we take enough of the teeth out of what they originally had written for inland port and make it much more of the board would have the ability to clean up Utah Lake and start to address enhancing it for recreational opportunities and other things. So again, huge shout out to a lot of the other cities in the county that have been working very hard to try and tame this bill. So we think we're going to have good language at some point in the future. But right now, we still have some amendments that we want to try and get in. And hopefully in the next week or two, that would be something that would come to reality.
Mark, is it fair then for a league position to stay TBD?
Absolutely. Absolutely at this point. And again, the draft bill that was circulated was far more offensive. This one, just a little softening, I think helps it go a long ways. And then just clarifying that the Lake Authority does not supersede municipal authorities that might be adjacent to the lake.
I want to echo that Mark just said, is that Representative Brammer from day one has said he wanted to work collaboratively with cities on this bill, and that's certainly been the case thus far. So thank you to Mark and Saratoga Springs, to Orem City, to American Fork, and I could go down the list who've all been providing feedback to Representative Brammer. So that'll be TBD on the bill tracker, and likely bring it back for an official position next week, assuming that this week it goes positively.
Thank you for that. And thank you. Appreciate that update, Mark. For those of us who don't live in Utah County and may not be as aware of it, that's really helpful information. Thank you. Okay. We had another chat from Moab, and we have a motion on the table from Carrie Malkovich of Woodland Hills to ratify the recommended positions of the staff, and a second by Evelyn Everton of Sandy City. Keep in mind, we already did vote a position of opposition to SB 61 second sub as it's currently written, but we have the framework of the negotiations that are taking place and the things staff is trying to accomplish in those negotiations, and so that was how we felt comfortable. Let's oppose it as it is, and staff's going to keep working toward the goals that have been established and the criteria we have. So that being said, all in favor of ratifying staff recommendations, please use the voting software. Remember, we're not taking votes in the chat. Use the voting software and let us know. I know we've had a few people drop off the call, but
Let's give it 10 more seconds, Mayor.
great. If you are a voting member, please let us know. One is yes, you vote to ratify the staff recommendations on the bills that we've discussed today. 2 is no.
I think we can close it.
Yeah, I think we're there. We're only 5 voting members short from where we had been. Okay, there you have it. We have a 95% yes. So the positions that were listed on the screen that we've gone over that have been discussed on each of these bills are the current positions that we have. And then there are more on the bill tracker and on the website. There's positions on all sorts of things. So with that, thank you to all of you. Keep in mind that our next meeting will be February 22nd, and then we have one on March 1st. Kind of strange, we only have 2 more LPCs during the session, and also kind of awesome. So again, I wish I could see you, and I wish I could see you in person. Thank you for your patience as we go about doing this electronic virtual LPC and legislative session. And really, we just appreciate all of you. Please watch your emails. Please keep in mind when those alerts come out that we need to contact our legislators. When we hear that from league staff, when you get that word, all of us, it's important that we act on it because it means it's important and the things we've discussed need to be addressed. So just appreciate all of your efforts as a League Army. Thank you for your time with us. Thank you so much to staff for all that you're doing, and best of luck to all of you. With that, I'm prepared to accept a motion to adjourn. And let me open the chat. If somebody will just say in the chat that you want to adjourn, that would be awesome. Okay, Evelyn has made a motion to adjourn. Christine second, Zach Jacobs, West Jordan second. Okay, we don't even need to vote. We are going to call this adjourned and tell everyone thank you. Many of us have council meeting in just a little while. So thank you, best of luck to all of you, and we will see you on Monday. Thank you, friends.